Good afternoon, and thanks for joining me as the Pacific rolls by me, and in the distance you can see the coast of Canada as we talk about the Civil War in Alaska. As we discussed on the earlier video, Yankee whalers out of New England, mostly out of Massachusetts, spanned the globe to hunt whales. As I stated, whale products, their oil, was instrumental in fueling the early parts of the Industrial Revolution. As the Civil War dawned in 1861, it was after petroleum was discovered in Pennsylvania and the oil rush was on. But even then, whaling was an important industry for the United States, and those whalers sought those whales to feed that demand. Many of those whalers ended up in the Pacific, and the Confederate commerce raiders were set out to destroy that industry and put financial pressure on the United States. Two of the most famous commerce raiders were the CSS Alabama and the CSS Shenandoah. The Alabama was sunk outside of France in June of 1864. The Shenandoah was laid about that time and launched and started its commerce raiding around the world. Over time, it sunk or captured over 38 whaling vessels, many of them in the Pacific, as you can see behind me. Now, what we are typically taught in classrooms is that the Civil War ended when Robert E. Lee surrendered on April 9th, 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse. But that's not quite true. Kirby Smith was still commanding land forces in the Trans-Texas area and did not surrender until June of 1865. The CSS Shenandoah was active in the Pacific at that time. And unlike a few years later, when transatlantic and trans-Pacific cables were laid to spread nearly instantaneous news around the world, ships at sea still had to rely on other sources of information. The Shenandoah captured in mid-June of 1865, a Yankee whaler, and was notified by a San Francisco newspaper aboard that ship that Lee had surrendered. That story, though, stated that Jefferson Davis was still in command of the Confederacy and ordering forces to continue the fight. So it continued to raid commerce ships around the world, and again specifically in the Pacific. It wasn't till a couple of months later when the Shenandoah came in contact with a British ship, and the British captain told the commander of the CSS Shenandoah that, of course, the war had ended. At that time, the Shenandoah captain and its crew were worried about being brought up on charges of piracy. They struck the colors and sailed to Liverpool and surrendered the ship to the administration of the United Kingdom in November of 1865, many months after Lee and then Smith had surrendered. The Shenandoah was the last ship or any sort of command that flew the Confederate flag. And when it surrendered itself in Liverpool in November of 1865, any forces that had loyalty to the Confederacy had all surrendered.